Okay, there is continuing interest between the candidate and the company past the first interview. The second interview is set. It is time to check references. When do you do them? Always, when there's continuing interest between the candidate and the company. Always do them. Don't get lazy. If the company says they're going to do them, you do them too. Aren't you curious about what the company is going to hear? I would be. Now, references can be used to overcome questions or objections that arise during the first interview. For instance, let's say that his employer says, we like him, but this position requires management ability, and his last three positions have been hands-on engineering positions. Well, we're going to go back to his references and ask about management ability, about initiative, about leadership, because that's their questions. We want to overcome questions or objections that arise during the first interview. Now, ideally, references will validate the candidate's ability to do the job. They will reinforce the company's impression of this candidate's ability to do this job. So the question should actually be different. You see, most recruiters don't do references properly. They ask questions on a form, and the questions say, what were the dates of employment? How much did he earn? Did he ever show up late for work? Was he a drinker, a gambler, a murderer? Well, we don't need to know that. We don't need to ask those questions. The questions that we want to ask should be designed to validate his ability to do the job. If he's a drinker or a gambler or a murderer, it is going to come out on those references, I assure you. Now, let's say the employer says we like him. They have no question. They have no objection. Then we're going to use those references just to reinforce their impression of his ability to do the job by talking to his references and saying, do you think he can do the job? Would you hire him to do this job? What did he do at your company that demonstrated his ability to do this job? Customize those references based on what the employer needs to know. Now, there is too much of a tendency on the part of recruiters to characterize references as good or bad. I often hear a recruiter saying, you know, I've got 4 good references and 1 bad one, and I don't know what to do with the bad one. Well, if you talk to that recruiter, you discover that he has a reference from an employer who worked with him 5 years ago who says he had a personality conflict with someone at the plant. That is not necessarily a bad reference. You should not characterize references on behalf of the employer. Check all references all the time. Always give them to the employer and let them draw their own conclusions. You know, if they're fabulous references, they can only help. If they're average references, as 90% of them are, they can neither help nor hurt. And if they're lousy references, then you have an obligation to give them to the employer. Don't characterize. Example, 5 years ago, I got job orders for 2 marketing managers from one of our client companies, East Coast and West Coast marketing managers for a microwave antenna company. The positions were $80K positions with bonuses that put them up over $100,000. I put my West Coast electronics marketing guy on these spots, and he filled the first one in about 2 weeks. Then he went to work on the East Coast position, and he was moaning and groaning for the first 2 days. I said, what's the matter, Paul? He said, well, this East Coast position was in a facility that was 100 miles from any place. It was in a real backwater in New Jersey. There was nothing within 100 miles of there but rivers, woods, and this facility. And he needed a real sharp pinstripe marketing guy. Well, I said, hang in there. He did. I checked in with him a week later. I said, how's it going? He said, great, problem solved. I said, well, tell me about it. He said, I found a guy who is 6'2", eyes are blue. He's a genius. He comes to work like a house on fire. I said, great, 6'2", eyes are blue, huh? How'd you find that out? He's in California, candidate's in New Jersey. How'd you find that out? Oh, the candidate told me. I said, the candidate told you he's 6'2", eyes are blue? He said, yeah. I said, tell me more about him, Paul. He said, well, he's worked at 5 great companies. Worked at Procter & Gamble, General Mills, Colgate-Palmolive. He reeled off 5 terrific companies. I said, gee, that's wonderful. How old is the guy? He's 27 years old. And he's available right now. I said, Paul, have you checked his references? Paul said, no, I don't need to. I've already presented him to the company. They're going to make him an offer. They love him. They say he's 6'2", eyes of blue. He's a genius. He comes to work like a house on fire. I said, Paul, check his references. You know that's part of the service that we provide. Well, Paul did. He went and he checked his references and came back in about an hour just as white as a sheet. And I said, what's the matter, Paul? And he said, well, I just spoke to his three previous employers, three most recent employers, and they all said the guy is 6'2", eyes of blue, he's a genius, he comes to work like a house on fire. And then at the end of 9 months, something snaps. He starts showing up late if he shows up at all, and after a year, he was gone. I got the same story from 3 employers. I said, well, gee, Paul, you better check with his original 2 employers, and Paul did, and he got exactly the same story. Well, I said, Paul, sorry, I told you to check those references, but you know we can't withhold this information from the client. You've got to tell them what you heard. But don't characterize it as good or bad. Just tell them what you heard and keep searching because you're going to have to find somebody else. So Paul called him up. He did give them the references. He didn't characterize it as good or bad, and he did continue the search. And wouldn't you know it, 2 days later, the company called up the candidate, made him an offer, and hired him. Well, after about 3 weeks, I just couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know why. And I called up the president, who was a casual acquaintance of mine, a guy named Larry, and I said, Larry, you got to tell me, why did you hire him? We didn't think the references were that good. And Larry said, Tony, no, the references were not that good. But you didn't check references on us, did you? And I said, no, why? He said, the position stinks. Said, we've been through 4 people in the last year. We haven't been able to keep a person in this position for longer than 4 months. It is a real bad spot. We're thrilled to death to get him. The guy wound up going to work there and staying there for a year, which is 4 times as long as anybody had ever had the position before. The point of this is that one person's turkey is another person's hero. If we had done those references early enough, we would have yanked this guy right out of the process. And yet here he was, the perfect candidate for that position, and they were thrilled to death to get him. Don't make decisions on behalf of the employer. Check the references and let them make the decision. Another reference story to show you how how references can influence deals in ways that you would never expect ahead of time. You guys know what corn nuts are? It's a snack food. 10 years ago, I was doing a search for the corn nuts plant in the Bay Area of San Francisco, and I found 5 snack food and confection guys. And to make a long story short, one guy was going back for his 3rd interview, a guy named Arnold, to get his offer. I knew what the number was. He knew what the number was. He was going in to get and take the offer. So Arnold went in. He called me after the 3rd interview, and he said, Tony, I didn't get the offer. I said, well, let me find out what happened to Arnold. And I called the board member I was dealing with and said, what happened to Arnold's offer? And he said, oh, don't worry. Mix up in communications. Get Arnold back in here next Tuesday. We'll make him the offer. So Arnold went back in next Tuesday, told to expect an offer, ready to take the offer. And he called me after the interview, and he said, Tony, they didn't make me an offer. And he was real upset, real upset. I said, Arnold, let me find out what happened. I called the board member, what happened to Arnold's offer? And he said, no excuses, no excuses. Get Arnold back in here next Tuesday. We'll make the offer. So Arnold went back in next Tuesday for his 5th interview, told to expect the offer, ready to take the offer, and he called me from the interview. And he said, Tony, they don't have the offer ready. I said, Arnold, let me find out what's happening. I called the board member. Where's Arnold's offer? And he says, oh, we have it. I said, great. He said, but we're not ready to give it to him yet. I said, why not? He said, Tony, did you know that Arnold weighs over 400 pounds? This is a snack food plant, remember. And I said, no, I didn't know that. And they said, well, we like Arnold, but we're concerned about his weight and how it affects his ability to perform. Have you checked his references? And I hadn't. I always did, but I hadn't this time. I said, keep him busy. I'll do it right now. I called up his 3 previous employers, which were all chocolate factories up in the Bay Area. And I said, I understand that Arnold is heavy. Does it affect his ability to do the job? And they all said, no, Arnold is a good food man, light on his feet, he's a good manager. One guy cracked. He said, Arnold likes to eat the profits. He samples off the line. But they all gave me great references. And I went back to the company and I said, okay, here are the references. The board member said, all right, based on that, we will make Arnold an offer right now. But Tony, one more thing. We want you to sign a piece of paper saying that if Arnold dies in the next year, you will replace him for free. Now, I just finished telling you this morning that I don't like 30-day guarantees. I had never heard the word guarantee used in connection with this business 10 years ago, so I said, sure, go ahead and send me the piece of paper. And they did, and I signed it. And last time I checked, last year, 9 years later, Arnold was still there crunching corn nuts. But the moral of this story is this. Time kills all deals. It kills all deals. Because I hadn't checked those references, this deal was dragging on and on. They could have had a walk-in, they could have had an internal referral, and I would have lost this one. You see, I always used to ask my references, what does the guy look like? Because I never used to meet my candidates. I worked long distance all the time. Check references. But of course, what's the further irony? The further irony is that if I had checked the references early, I never would have sent Arnold in. Ever. I would have decided this guy can't possibly do the job, and they'd never hired him, and I would have found somebody else. Don't play God. Don't make decisions on behalf of the employer. Find them what they say they want, check those references, give the whole kit and caboodle to the employer, and let him make his own decision. Now, still under the heading of references, I want to discuss something called lost wages litigation. There's a whole new body of law called lost wages litigation, which is affecting our ability to get references. Let me describe it anecdotally. Ampex comes to me and says, Tony, we need a bookkeeper. So I go and find Susie. I present Susie to Ampex. Ampex says, yes, we like her. Check references on her. So she gives me the name of 5 references. While I'm checking references on her, Ampex interviews Mary, likes her, and makes her an offer. Now, Susie decides that maybe it was her references that prevented her from getting this job. Now, the day that we can no longer protect the identities or protect the people who give us references, we won't be able to get references anymore. You see, we can get them now because we can get Susie to name references for us, and we can use our own networks to get backdoor references. Companies don't give references. They just don't give them anymore because of lost wages litigation. And they're advising a lot of their employees not even to give off-the-record references. We can still get them. But the day that, that Susie starts filing suit against Roger for giving her a bad reference, we will not be able to get references anymore. Protect the people who give you references. Now, still, on this matter of references, I have one more point I want to make here, and it has to do with letters of recommendation. Somebody gave me an article from a West Coast newspaper. I think it's a riot, and it really proves the point. I want to read it to you. It's called How to Recommend Nerd, Avoid Lawsuit. If you were considering an applicant for employment and received a letter of recommendation that said, in my opinion, you will be very fortunate to get this person to work for you, would you hire the person, turn him away, or ask the writer for more details? The only sensible answer is the last, because, as a moment's scrutiny makes clear, the letter just as aptly describes a lazy employee as a valuable one. I'll read the sentence again. In my opinion, you will be very fortunate to get this person to work for you. The sentence is an example of a technique developed by Robert J. Thornton, a professor of economics at Lehigh University. Thornton calls his technique LIAR, L-I-A-R, for Lexicon of Inconspicuously Ambiguous Recommendations. He says, there must be 1 million people out there suffering from the problem of how to write a letter of recommendation for a person who isn't really qualified. The problem is worsened, Thornton points out, in a society where people have become quick to sue and where, of late, the courts have opened employment records to litigious employees looking for ammunition. Now, liar letters, whether perceived correctly or not, are virtually litigation-proof, Thornton says. To describe a candidate who is hopelessly incompetent, Thornton would have you write, I most enthusiastically recommend this candidate with no qualifications whatsoever. To describe a candidate who is so unproductive that the job would be better left unfilled, he suggests, I can assure you that no person would be better for the job. To describe a candidate who is not worth further consideration, I would urge you to waste no time making this candidate an offer of employment. With a little practice, it is a game anyone can learn to play. To describe a candidate about whom nothing can be praised. I cannot say enough to honestly recommend this person for employment, or it would be impossible to accurately describe the candidate's qualifications. The point is, read your letters of recommendation real carefully these days, folks, because often they're not worth the paper that they are printed on. We have checked references. Second interview is coming up tomorrow. It is time to prepare the candidate and the company for the second interview. The key questions in second interview prep are to the candidate. If the employer makes you an offer of, anybody remember what number Charlie has closed at? What number? 42. He came out and closed himself at 42, remember? If the employer makes you an offer of $42,000 tomorrow, are you prepared to accept, and when would you like to start? If the employer makes you an offer of $42K tomorrow, are you prepared to accept? What is the range of acceptable answers to that question? Yes. Yes, we know that in the safety of this room, don't we? But when we get on that phone and start asking the candidate, are you prepared to accept tomorrow, he doesn't always say yes, does he? He starts saying things like, well, I'd like to think about it, or I have another offer. Actually, sometimes he has another offer and he doesn't tell us he has that other offer. We'll get there in a second. But he starts saying things like, I want to think about it. Well, let me back up for a second. It is your role as the broker of this placement to make sure that the candidate has done all his thinking before that offer comes out. By the time we get to this stage, that thinking should be done. There should be nothing left to think about. So that when you say, if that company makes you an offer of $42,000, remember, you've been asking them all along, what are you prepared to accept? 43, 42, he's closed at 42. Company makes you an offer of $42,000 tomorrow, you're prepared to take it. Yes. Company makes you an offer of $42,000 tomorrow, you're prepared to take it. Well, I'm going to need a week to think about it. Great. We'll put the offering interview off for a week. Do not let the offer be extended to a candidate who is not prepared to accept it. That offer is currency. It spends, but it can't spend when it's in the possession of somebody who's neither accepting nor rejecting it. It's on ice. It's in suspended animation. Make sure that when that candidate gets the offer, he is ready to take it, and don't let him get it until then. Now, Tony, come on, this is real life. Isn't it reasonable to let that candidate think about it for a little while? Well, what's a little while, guys? What's a little while? Is a little while 4 days? No, that's not reasonable at all. Is a little while an hour? Yeah, that's reasonable. Is it reasonable for the candidate to go out to dinner with his wife tonight and discuss it one last time? Sure. Bring it in tomorrow morning and sign it? Sure. Is it reasonable for the candidate to hold on to it for 2 days? I don't think so. Why does he need to hold on to it? What does he need to think about for 2 days that he hasn't thought about already? No, that candidate should be ready to take that offer. But we say to the candidate, offer comes out tomorrow at 42, are you ready to take it? He says, yes. Good. Let's move on to the company. John, are you prepared to extend an offer tomorrow of $46,000? And if Charlie takes it, when would you like him to start? Now, remember, that employer has been telling us if the two group VPs like him, he's the finalist. Two group VPs like him, will send him home with the offer. So we know what their plan is. Now, it's the night before the offering interview. We say, John, if the two group VPs like him tomorrow, you're going to send him home with an offer? And he says, well, we're going to need a week. Has that ever happened to you? We're going to need a week. Now, of course, in the absence of specific information about what their plan was, if he said we're going to need a week, we just have to say, okay, great. But we know they had intended to send the finalists home with the offer, right? So now how can we read it? Going to send him home with an offer tomorrow, Charlie? Well, we're going to need a week. What does it probably mean? There's another candidate in there. That's right. See, I want to teach you how to read the situation. Almost always means there's another candidate in there. So now you can ask the question, are you interviewing someone else? Well, as a matter of fact, another recruiter called us on Tuesday and presented a candidate, sounded kind of good. We have an interview set up with them tomorrow. We just want to take a look at them before we make a final decision. Which is why it always drives me nuts to hear a recruiter say, it's too late for me to get involved in this search. They already have someone they want to make an offer to. What better time to get involved in a search than when they're in a decision-making mode and they have a point of reference, a standard for comparison. I wish I could get involved in every search at the finish line. You'd be able to get instant feedback, get your deals put together fast all the time. That's the best time to get involved in a deal. Think how many of your own deals have been blown to bits at the last minute by some other recruiter's candidate. I wish we could get involved in every search at the last minute. So John says, yeah, we're going to see somebody else. Let's take the next scenario. We say, John, you're prepared to extend an offer tomorrow, $46,000, and if he accepts, when would you like him to start? And John says, well, if the two group VPs like him tomorrow, we're going to make him an offer, but we can't have it ready by tomorrow. It's going to take us a few days to get it written. Has that ever happened to you? Now, I don't want to disillusion the new guys here, but some companies are just a little flaky, and they just can't get it done. Now, here's where a recruiter with influence is going to make things happen. See, a recruiter with influence, a recruiter who has a real strong client relationship, is going to march into that client. He's going to pull people off the phone. He's going to get people out of meetings. He's going to find out where the log jam is. He's going to go right there and blow it to pieces. He's going to get that offer moving. Going to get it signed off. See, that's what an influential recruiter can do. He can make things happen. That's his job, to make things happen. Some recruiters take the role of bystander, of observer, of good guy, of commentator. That is not the role of a recruiter. The role of a recruiter is to get in there and make the hire happen. That's what the company's paying them for. And if that means moving people along, pulling people out of meetings, getting the offer signed off, so be it. You know, we recruiters are always telling our candidates, be decisive, show them what you're made of. When they make that offer, take it, take it, take it, take it. Same thing applies to the companies. Big shot recruiter is going to go into this company and say, you know what? You've been promising this candidate an offer at the second interview, make it, or else it'll make you look bad. I mean, you've guaranteed them that the offer is going to be ready. Show them that you're decisive. Show them that you can make things happen. Get it done. Recruiter's going to tell a company that. Next scenario, night before the offering interview. Talking to John, we say, John, are you prepared to extend an offer tomorrow? John says, if the two group VPs like him, we are going to send him home with an offer tomorrow. All right? Charlie's prepared to take it. They're prepared to extend it. Should we let that interview take place? Yes! You bet! You bet! All right, so the second interview takes place tomorrow. Charlie calls us after the second interview, and the key questions in second interview debrief of candidate are, Charlie, did they make you an offer? How much is it? Did you accept it? When would you like to start? Key questions in second interview debrief of the company are, did you extend an offer? How much is it? Did he accept it? When would you like him to start? And there is an infinite variety of combinations of answers to those questions, and they constitute the subject of closing.